Hello, I'm Joe Haddow, and this is our series of interviews with the Theakston Old Peculier Crime Novel of the Year Award longlistees, produced and curated by Harrogate International Festivals in partnership with Theakston Old Peculier, WHSmiths and the Express, and it's great to have you with us. I'm joined today by a debut novelist who worked in politics for nearly 20 years before studying an MA in creative writing, which led to her writing her first novel. It's called Blood and Sugar, and here to tell us more is Laura Shepherd-Robinson. Hello, welcome to you.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
And it's great to have you with us. Where do we find you today?
In my flat in London, which I haven't left very much in the last 2 months like everybody else, but it's a nice place to be.
Well, I was thinking this the other day because I live in a flat in London as well, and I was going through a sort of up and down with it, you know, of like, oh, I wish I had more space, and then I was sort of quite comfortable just staying in it. And I've noticed, I don't know about you, Laura, but I've noticed it's just a little bit quieter than usual.
Definitely. The birds have started singing in London again. It's lovely.
Yes, and it's really
from that point of
nice.
view. Yeah.
For us Londoners, you know, the bird singing is, and actually being able to hear it is something that, you know, we don't always get. So I'm looking at the positives.
Trying
to. So congratulations on the long list.
Thank you so much.
Prize. And let's talk about the book, Blood and Sugar. It's a novel set in the 18th century, and it's in and around Deptford. And I just wondered what drew you to this particular time and place.
Well, I've always loved the 18th century. It's a century of contrasts for me. You've got, on the one hand, you know, these sort of flowering of Enlightenment ideas and kind of liberal political thought, but at the same time, it still remains a very brutal society with, you know, capital punishment and slavery, which I focus on in Blood and Sugar. You know, blood sports. It felt like such fertile ground for writing crime.
Yeah, it's. I've read other historical novels, you know, that are set around that time, very different stories, but there's a lot to go at, I think, isn't there? And that's possibly why authors are drawn there, because there's so much scope for stories.
Absolutely, and I think it's quite underwritten about the 18th century. You get lots of novels about sort of the Tudors, and you get lots of novels set in the Victorian era, but the period in between is much less widely covered, and it's having a bit of a renaissance at the moment. There's a number of really good novels that cover that period, and the 17th century too, and it just felt, for me, it felt so right to set my novel there. Is historic research a pleasure, or is it a chore for you? It's an absolute delight for me. And I think you'd struggle to write historical fiction if you did find it a chore. Not just, you know, I love finding all the little details and finding things to go in the book, but also I get a lot of ideas for plot from my research as well. So quite a lot of kind of subplots and strands originated in something I found in the course of my research. And your dad is Tony Robinson, who many of us know is a massive history buff because he's part of the Time team. Did your love of history come from him, do you think? I think a lot of it did originally. I mean, both my parents were very interested in history and would go off on like archaeological digs to volunteer when I was young, and I think it would have been impossible to grow up in a house like mine and not be infused by history. Tell us about the MA you did then, because this is a big shift, isn't it? If you were in politics and that was a big part of your career, 20 odd years, and then, you know, you did this course and now you're a writer. What made you want to do that and that switch? I think it had always been in the back of my mind that, or maybe not always, but certainly from sort of my late 20s, I'd kind of thought, oh, if there ever comes a time when I don't want to do this anymore, I'd love to see if I could write a novel, because I've always read really widely, and my job involved writing too, sort of speech writing and things like that. So it wasn't such a huge jump to see if I could do it, and thank God it worked out.
Because actually, one might think that you could have gone down the route of writing, more contemporary, political-based thrillers and stuff. And I suppose possibly you'll tell me that was something that you wanted to actually stay away from because you'd done politics and you wanted to go away from that.
I certainly wouldn't rule out never writing something in a contemporary novel, and both of my historical novels so far have had elements of politics in them, even if it hasn't been the absolute centre of the plot. I think I would probably struggle to write a book without any politics in it at all. But no, I definitely wouldn't rule it out for the future. It's something I have toyed with doing. But for the moment, I'm enjoying the history so much that I think I'm certainly the novel I'm working on at the moment is another historical novel.
Great. And on the long list, on the list of these 18 books which you are part of, there's a whole range of amazing crime novels.
It's an incredible long list.
It is, isn't it? Isn't it great?
Yeah.
Do you have I'm sure you've read some of them. Do you have a favourite from the ones you've read on there?
Well, as well as like the great writers who are on there, the ones that we've all been reading for years and years. I also have a number of friends who are wonderfully good writers, so Will Dean and Jane Casey, Alex North, and Abir Mukherjee's books I love. And if you've read Blood and Sugar and you like Blood and Sugar, you will adore Abir's books because they're quite wonderful historical crime. So I'm waving the flag for historical crime. But I think if I absolutely had to choose one, it would be Mick Herron, because I'm quite new to his books. I only read my first one just over a year ago, and since then I've devoured them because the writing is so sublime. It's funny, but it's also emotional and moving, and the plots are clever. And they're books that you read and just like feel like throwing it across the room because he's so damn good.
It's both a pleasure and exactly. Not so much.
Yeah.
So that's Joe country, isn't it? You're talking about,
yes,
which is
on
that list, yeah. And to come back to Abir very, very briefly, and his sort of style of writing and what he's approaching. And with yourself and many others, and thinking back to the Axeman's Jazz and lots of other books that have appeared on this list before. Do you think we're having a sort of historical crime renaissance at the moment, or purple patch? Is it a really good time to be a historical crime?
I certainly think that sort of in the wake of C.J. Sansom, there followed. People saw that actually you could write historical crime books and they could sell, and that makes a difference because the publishers have to want to buy it, and so there's all these like really talented writers like Antonia Hodgson and Andrew Taylor, as you say, Abir, and I just think it's fabulous that there's all these different periods being covered through crime fiction, because I think it brings history to a wider audience, and also, as I say, I think the really best historical crime novels could only have been written in that time, and the kind of crimes that they explore are a product of that time, and I think that can make history incredibly interesting and exhilarating read.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of readers of historical fiction, whether that be crime or whether it be, someone like Hilary Mantel, they're reading it so that they can learn as well, and they can discover these periods that they might not have known about, and maybe go off and research it further. So
yes, and as a reader, I love that.
Yeah.
When you get a book and you're like, oh my God, I'm finding out about this really interesting subject, but it doesn't feel like a history lesson because you're reading about it in the context of an amazing plot.
I've always thought about it like a game of squash, because in a game of squash, when I do play occasionally, I never feel like I'm actually exercising because I'm just sort of so in the moment and so set on trying to win that after 40 minutes or whatever, you suddenly go, oh, wow, look how much of a workout I've had. And it's similar, isn't it, when you're reading a really great story and you don't realise necessarily all the info that you're getting. And then afterwards you can reel off all these facts.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a skill that you have to learn when you're writing historical fiction is how to weave that research into your novels without it feeling like someone's giving me a lecture on the British Raj or slavery or whatever.
Yeah. Is that hard to do? Is that quite a conscious thing when you're writing?
I tend to deal with it by, I will do a lot of research at the beginning, and then I will just go away and write the story and try not to look and really focus on the characters. And then I come back later and tidy up any research bits that where I need more. But I think if you do that, then it's the characters and their journey that is centre stage at all times, which is as it should be.
Coming back to the award, how did it feel for you when you heard that you'd been longlisted for the biggest award in crime
just
fiction?
Astonishing and unexpected and wonderful. To be up there with all those names of people that, household names like Lee Child and Val McDermott, it was just amazing.
And Harrogate itself is a very special festival that the whole crime community talk about. And
the crime community is in mourning. We are all in mourning. This is like, this bunch of quite introverted people who don't get out that much. And Harrogate is our amazing weekend of the year. So we're all quite sad, but I'm sure we will make it work remotely. We
will, and there will be another chance in the years to come for us all to get together, and and we'll it'll be a sort of double, won't it? Because we've missed out this year.
It will, yes.
It will be extra special. Just to come back to your research a little bit more, because I know that you're a huge fan of it, and it's a really enjoyable part of the process and a very important part of the process. And I think quite recently you got your mudlarking license.
I did, but we haven't managed to go yet because just as we were going to embark on our mudlarking trip, they locked everything down, and the foreshore of the Thames where we were going to go and do it is currently closed. But I'm fully intending to do this as soon as soon as this is over and we're allowed again. I've got a friend. Whole group of friends who like going mudlarking, and they told me how amazing it is. Yeah. Although I think last time they did it, they found what they thought was a gun in the Thames, an old gun, and they had to call the police, but it turned out to be a starting pistol, so that was okay.
Right. So it's a sort of gun.
But yeah, it was a good start to a crime novel, I thought.
Yeah. And there might be some people who don't know what mudlarking is, so can you just tell us about...
Sorry, yes. It's when you go onto the mud flats, particularly on the Thames is particularly good for mudlarking, and there's just so much history, as you can imagine, in the middle of London. And you basically trawl the mud flats, and they're quite strict about how far you can dig down, but you can't dig down very far, but often you don't need to. You can find amazing bits of pottery and coins and some of the mudlarks on Twitter. It's worth following those people if you're interested in history, because they find the most incredible things in the Thames. So I really recommend it. And
a sort of gift for a historical fiction writer, I imagine, as well, to be able to do that, because like you say, finding a starting pistol, you immediately go, what a great start to a novel. And
yes,
when you can actually get out there, when it's safe to do so and we're allowed, who knows how many trinkets you're going to find that are going to inspire a story. Yeah. Just finally, before we let you go, tell us what the Theakston Old Peculier Crime Novel of the Year Award means to you personally.
I mean, aside from just the kind of personal joy at being included on the list, I mean, in the wider terms, I think it's great that we have such a big award to celebrate crime writing in this country. And I think crime writing has undergone such a renaissance. I mean, it's always been wonderful, but it feels like it's really sort of flowering at the moment. And there are just such good writers who are exploring all kinds of different angles of crime. So I love that. And then the second thing it means to me is Harrogate and that feeling of coming together as a crime writing community, because one of the things I've been so touched by when embarking on this new career is quite how friendly and supportive the crime writing community is, and I felt really welcomed into it. And Harrogate and the Theakstons is a real focus for that community to come together.
Certainly is, yeah. Blood and Sugar is the book we're talking about. It's published by Mantle. It's out now and it's available from WHSmith if you haven't read it. And remember that you get to vote for the shortlist of this prize. So if you want to see Laura on that list, then head over to HarrogateTheakstonCrimeAward.com and place your vote. She'll be very happy for that, won't you, Laura? Just before we let you go, you mentioned another novel. So is the second novel out, on the way, finished?
The second novel was going to be out next month, but sadly it's been delayed because of the current situation until January. It's called Daughters of Night, and it has it's a loose sequel to Blood and Sugar with some recurring characters. It's about women and prostitution, the Georgian sex trade, but it's also got elements of Greek myth and art, and I can't wait for everybody to read it. And it's very frustrating to have to wait another 6 months, but there we go.
But we'll be so ready for it by January, won't we?
I hope so.
Yeah. Thanks so much for talking to us today, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.